You know, I started wearing the shirt and they came out with it for one particular race weekend, but now we have to talk about it. Haas are cooking. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. We are here to talk about the 2024 Mexico City Grand Prix. It just wrapped up, and boy, oh boy, that might have been one of the most exciting one-stop races I've seen in a very long time. It was fascinating from start to finish. We saw some very interesting stuff at the start of the race. We saw some hunting down going on at the end of the race, and a lot of exciting things in between. It was a Carlos Sainz win. It was a dominant Carlos Sainz win, and we're here to talk about it. We're going to go over our race and weekend quick hits. We're going to go over our winners and losers for the weekend, and then we'll wrap things up with our predictions, results for the predictions we made before the weekend began. But before we jump into it, if you haven't already, subscribe down below and leave a comment saying, give me your rating for the Mexico City Grand Prix this year out of 10. I know Mexico isn't always the most exciting race out there. Even this one had a few dull moments, but I think overall, I think it was pretty good. I'm interested to see what you guys think. Let me know. Let's kick things off with our race quick hits, and you have to start at the front. Carlos Sainz on pole position in this one, and although he did not technically lead out of turn one, he ends up leading when it matters the most, right at the end. It didn't take him more than the end of the second racing lap before he was able to overtake Max Verstappen and effectively just kind of drive off into the distance. And so Carlos ends up taking a dominant win in this one by 5, 6, 7 seconds. I can't remember the exact gap at the end, but he held his own teammate at bay for a long time in this one. And then ultimately Lando Norris, who finished P2 off at the end. Carlos looked phenomenal all weekend long, basically from the jump. Super excited for Carlos. He said that he wanted to get at least one more win while he was at Ferrari, and he definitely gets it this weekend in Mexico City. Fantastic weekend from him. Dominant is an understatement almost. He was on the pace from the jump and absolutely flew to another victory in the Scuderia. Teammate Charles Leclerc comes home to finishing in P3, although he is very lucky he finished at all, because while he was defending from Lando Norris's charge back up towards P2, he had a moment coming out of the final corner that almost sent him into the Shadow Realm. But unfortunately for him, he was able to catch it. It did surrender P2 to Lando Norris, but at least he was able to continue on and finish P3 in that one. I felt my heart sink when that happened, because it was going to be bad if he actually put that one in the wall. So good on him to catch it. I don't think we can go much further without discussing probably the most impactful thing from the beginning of the race, and that is the Max Verstappen versus Lando Norris at the beginning. Obviously, a lot went on at the beginning and ultimately resulted in a 20-second cumulative time penalty for Max Verstappen for two different incidents. One forcing Lando off the track in the exit of turn 4, and then one for leaving the track and gaining advantage, or after the double right-hander. And in a corner that's not even really a corner, he just absolutely just set one down the inside of Lando when had no intentions of ever making the corner, ultimately garnering him another 10-second penalty, which effectively put him out of the running from there. And even then, after trying to do their best to recover from a 20-second penalty, if that is such a thing, the pace definitely just wasn't there. He was even struggling to catch the Mercedes there at the end of the race. So I don't know if he might have had some damage from those incidents, but it was a tough time for Max at the beginning of the race. And you can definitely tell that the stewards took what happened in Austin and went, okay, we're watching you, be careful. And then he went, all right, bro, I'm just gonna send it and pray you guys don't see it. And ultimately they did, and it led to 20 seconds worth of penalties, and that effectively was that. For the Lando Norris side of that, ultimately he does come home and finish in P2. Did have the fastest lap for a little while, but we saw 2 or 3 drivers stop at the end of the race to try and get the fastest lap. Charles ultimately ends up coming home with that fastest lap, so he'll get the extra bonus point for that one when he finished in P3. All in all, Lando kind of reversed a lot of the damage that happened last week in Austin, ultimately finishing well above Max. Max finished in P6 in this race and actually was getting chased down by Kevin Magnussen, but we'll get there in a second, I promise. And ultimately just did not look on the pace basically from after his penalties onward. I think he recovered about as well as he could have, all things considered. But at the end of the day, Lando did exactly what he needed to do. Scored more points than Max, tried to recover a little bit from what happened last week in Austin, but ultimately it's still going to be very, very tough. I saw a tweet that said his points needed per weekend has only gone up, even after finishing this far ahead of him in Mexico City. So I think I saw that he needs to finish like 11 points over max every race left. Obviously that number can go up and down depending on what happens, but it's not done, but it's definitely still an uphill battle even after finishing P2 versus a P6, and the points you need over max every weekend goes up. Can't feel particularly good. What did heat up is actually the battle for the constructors, because even though Lando did finish ahead of Lando, Ferrari overtook Red Bull in the constructors, with Sergio Perez finishing last on track and Max only coming home in P6, a 1-3, more than enough. And now they're actually less than 30 points behind McLaren in the constructors, and with Oscar Piastri having a couple of stinkers in a row, and Ferrari all of a sudden looking very, very, very good, it's going to actually get really interesting these last few races to see who's going to come home to finish on the top step for the constructors. I think the drivers is almost done, but the constructors actually still has a lot to play for, and it's actually going to get very, very interesting, and I for one cannot wait to see what happens, because it could get very spicy, and I think it's going to actually be very exciting, especially if Ferrari can keep up the pace that they've been on the last 2 weekends, because boy oh boy, they have been cooking the last 2 weeks. If they can keep it up, could get very fun down the stretch. All right, it's time. We look like a bunch of legends. Kevin Magnussen, by the way, came into Mexico and delivered his best result since Bahrain 2022. What an absolute masterclass from Kevin Magnussen. Came in off of a very strong US Grand Prix weekend last week. Ultimately, a bit of a strategy blunder by Haas keeps him out of the points in the Grand Prix last week. Comes to Mexico, a track which has not treated Haas very nicely, by the way, and finishes in P7 and was actually chasing down Max Verstappen and holding off Oscar Piastri behind, by the way, on tires that I think Piastri had about 10 lap fresher tires, and Kevin Magnussen was saying, "No, sir, you will not catch me, because I am absolutely flying this weekend." Kevin comes home to finish in P7. I think that this is by far and away Haas's best performance in Mexico, and gets him another crucial 8 points in the constructors, and now they have a double-digit lead over VCARB in the constructors. Obviously, with 4 races left, there's still a lot to play for, but having just a little bit more of that buffer is going to be absolutely huge as we continue to go down the stretch of the season. And it's just, I needed to include Kevin Magnussen in this at some point, because the dude was absolutely flying all weekend long, putting it P7 in qualifying, putting it P7 on the final grid results on Sunday. Absolutely fantastic, Kevin. We love to see it. Okay, we got to talk about it. Sergio Perez versus the world at his home race. At least this year he managed to finish the race, although it was last on track. Checo was beefing with children all day up and down in this one, and I know it's going to come to a lot of words online, but ultimately I think this really just comes down to don't qualify, P18, P17, wherever you were at your home race in a Red Bull, which I know isn't necessarily the best car on the grid. It probably is actually the 3rd best car on the grid at this point, very clearly, but it's just, you're not beefing with Lawson, you're not beefing with Colapinto, you're not beefing with any of these guys if you're qualifying where you should be, my guy. He obviously had those moments with Lawson that gave him damage going through turns 4 and 5, trying to overtake Lawson. Lawson said, "No, sir, I will not go into that sweet night, and you shall not pass." And ultimately, that resulted in some damage to Checo's side pod and some probably unknown damage underneath. And ultimately, I mean, we heard comments throughout the race. There was even a video of Liam Lawson, who passed Sergio Perez at the end of the race, and giving him a nice bird at his home race. So I think there's going to be a lot of words and meetings going on behind the scenes at Red Bull this week. It's not a good look for, I think, any of them. And honestly, even though Liam ultimately is kind of in the same boat of, does it look great? Probably not. But at the same time, when you're the young kid chasing down, trying to take that guy's seat, that will be perceived very differently. It'll be perceived like a guy who's hungry, trying to take your seat, and it looks like you're just retaliating, trying to stoop to his level, to say it like that. It's a tough weekend for Checo, very, very tough, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. He finished his home race, which is a lot better than could be said last year when he crashed out at turn 1. So Checo versus the world, more like Checo versus a couple of children chasing him down. I'll end up our race quick hits by touching on the Albon Tsunoda crash at the beginning of the race. Turn 1. I know a lot of people were kind of overreacting at the beginning of the race, but I think after further review, it does look like more of a racing incident. Albon got squeezed by Gasly on the inside, obviously with Tsunoda on the outside. It was just a 3-into-1 situation, and Albon could not move over further to the left because Yuki was already on the grass, and ultimately they just run out of road, and Tsunoda and Albon come together. Thankfully, Yuki is okay. I know there's a lot of shots, pictures of that crash and kind of how dangerous that actually kind of was. It was very close to being, he was airborne backwards, flying through the air into the wall, and so it could have been a lot worse. Thankfully, everyone seems to be okay. I do feel bad for Albon and Tsunoda. Yuki had been flying all weekend long before an unfortunate crash in Q2 in qualifying and another crash at the beginning of the race. It just does not seem like Yuki gets the benefit of the doubt in Mexico at all, and the universe says, no, you will be punished every single time. And then as for Albon, obviously Albon was having a very good weekend up until then. Finally showing the pace over Colapinto a little bit after a lot of stuff has been said online after the last couple of rounds, especially last weekend, culminating there with his spin in qualifying and ultimately contact and issues in the race itself. Alex has not been the target of niceties online, and it was nice to see him kind of, start to show the pace a little bit, but ultimately this crash taking him out at the beginning of the race is going to do him not necessarily no favors. It's not his fault, but at the same time, I was really excited to see what he could do in a car and a track that seemed to suit the Williams fairly decently. But at the end of the day, that's Formula One, and that's just how it goes. All right, let's move on to our weekend winners and losers. We'll begin with our weekend winner. I want to give my special honorable mention to Kevin Magnussen. I kind of gave my spiel on him in our quick hits section. Fantastic weekend from Kevin. Would love to put him here. But I think the weekend winner has to go to Carlos Sainz. I mean, a guy who has just kind of slid under the radar and has been performing very, very well in the last few weekends, culminating in a win in Mexico City. Last week in Austin, finished P2 behind Charles Leclerc. This week, he actually manages to get to the benefit of Max and Lando kind of playing around at the beginning. And while Charles did manage to get by Max and Lando to fight for P2, Carlos was absolutely gone on the pace and looked very fabulous the whole weekend long. Have to give it to Carlos. Another win for Ferrari before he heads off to Williams, and only 4 races left, guys. We have to appreciate this man's in the Ferrari while we can. He has been absolutely on the pace, and I'm excited to see what he can do in these last few races. But at the same time, we're talking about Mexico City right here. And Carlos Sainz, you're my weekend winner because you dominated basically from lights to flag. Going for our weekend loser now, I think it's pretty obvious. It has to be Sergio Perez. Out in Q1 in your home race, albeit, again, not in the fastest car on the grid anymore, but you have to be getting out of Q1 at your home race. Beefing with Lawson essentially the entire week, almost the entire weekend, but especially all the race. Clearly rattled by that situation. He definitely feels some type of way about the young kid trying to take his seats, and just ultimately finishes on the back foot. He qualified, I think, like 18th. He finished P17. Was nowhere near to getting the fastest lap. Had a lot of radio messages kind of showing just how little respect he has for Lawson in this one. And well, I know obviously in the heat of the moment, in the race, in the cockpit, you're going to say one thing over another. But Checo, this is not your finest looking weekend, especially at home, especially for a lot of people who were expecting you to do very, very well this weekend, to come in and try and avenge last year, to come out and kind of lay a bit of a dud like this. It's got to be tough, and I know you had damage, but at the same time, it's a tough look. It's very, very tough, and I'm sorry to say, Checo, but you're my weekend loser. All right, let's go on. Let's talk about our predictions, results, in a very mixed bag for me. I was saved a lot by qualifying this weekend, but all of my other predictions were absolute duds. We'll begin with my pick for biggest positive surprise. I went for Esteban Ocon. Ocon scored points here last year, finishing P10. Finally got the upgrades that Gasly showed a lot of promise with at the US Grand Prix. And while Ocon did have a very decent race, it was Gasly who ended up finishing in the points in this one, so I cannot give myself a point there. A little disappointing for Ocon, I'm sure, but can't win them all. My pick for biggest disappointment this weekend was Lando Norris. I had a bit of a theme going on this weekend in terms of Lando. Obviously, coming home to finish P2, had this beef with Max at the beginning. That allowed Carlos and Charles to kind of build the gap that they did over the course of the race, and was unable to catch both of them by the end of the race. Coming home to finish in P2. Cannot give myself the point on that one. Now, the biggest thing that we managed to do is in qualifying. I predicted a Charles Leclerc pole, obviously not, picked the wrong Ferrari. I had a Max Verstappen P2 and a Lando Norris P3. So picking actually 2 out of the 3 qualifying right gives us 2 points and actually saves us a little bit here this weekend. So 2 out of 3, not too bad. And I actually just picked the wrong Ferrari to put it on pole. Now, in terms of the race podium, this was conflicted, and I'll combine this with my one crazy prediction because my one crazy prediction influenced my podium prediction, because my one crazy prediction was that Max and Lando have a coming together a la Austria, which would keep them off of the podium. And while I did have contact in this race, it was nowhere near enough to give myself a point for one crazy prediction. Obviously did not keep Lando from the podium as he finished in P2. And so at the end of the day, I predicted a Charles Leclerc win, an Oscar Piastri P2, and a Sergio Perez P3. I thought Oscar and Checo were going to be there to pick up the pace. And obviously when both of them went out in Q1, that was basically it for me there. So I predicted a Charles Leclerc win. He did finish P3, and so I get a half point for picking him in my top 3, but it's in the wrong spot. So overall in the weekend, 2.5 points. Doesn't seem that bad, but my predictions were way off. But if we take a look at our prediction standings now, after adding up all of our predictions from the community, I end up coming home with 2.5 points this week. And now if we look at our new totals, I'm sitting on 69.5 points. British still in the lead with 72 points. Son of 40 closes into the P2 spot solo with 70 points. F1 Inferno and Andrew both with 4-point weekends, leading the field this weekend, with Inferno now on 48.5 points and Andrew with 45.5 points. It was a lot of fun for predictions, a lot of differing predictions, which I always really enjoy to see who comes out on top in those types of weekends. It's no fun if everyone picks the same people, right? I agree. But guys, that wraps it up. The only question remaining is what is next for Formula One? We don't even have to wait another week before the next weekend begins, as F1 now heads to Brazil to race around Interlagos, one of my favorite weekends on the year. It is a sprint race weekend, so we'll be having 2 races upcoming week. I love Brazil. It is so much fun, and I cannot wait to see what happens this year. Last year in the Grand Prix, we had a Verstappen, Norris, Alonso podium here in Brazil. And so who do we think is going to stand on the podium this year? Stay tuned for our predictions video in the next coming days. And if you're interested in having your predictions included in our predictions video or joining our predictions championship, you can head to the link down below in the description, join the Discord, and leading up to every Grand Prix weekend, I make a call for predictions and you can have them voiced there. But guys, that is going to wrap up the video for me here. Once again, if you haven't already, subscribe down below, turn on notifications so you don't miss a single upload. And as always, leave a comment down below what you would give the Mexico City Grand Prix out of 10. That is going to wrap it up for me here in this one, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.